The night Cassandra's world ended, the moon hid behind a veil of clouds, as if even the heavens could not bear to witness what was about to be taken from her. She would remember that detail forever. The silence came first. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating stillness that settles only when something precious has been violently torn away. The torches lining the stone corridor flickered, their flames bowing low, as though afraid. Cassandra stood frozen at the threshold of her father's chamber, her small hands clenched into the fabric of her gown, her breath shallow and uneven. Her father lay still. Too still. Lord Alaric, strong, principled, unyielding in his loyalty to the crown, was gone. His chest did not rise. His familiar warmth had already begun to fade, leaving behind a hollow shell that looked nothing like the man who had once lifted her onto his shoulders and sworn no harm would ever touch her. Cassandra was 16 years old when death taught her its first cruel lesson. The healers whispered of sudden illness, of fate, of the moon goddess calling him home. But Cassandra saw the truth in the tight expressions of the guards, in the way Lord Tryon, her uncle, stood too composed at the foot of the bed. She noticed how his eyes never once softened with grief, how his fingers curled around his signet ring, as though calculating something far more valuable than mourning. That was the moment she understood. Her father's death was not an ending. It was a beginning. By dawn, Cassandra's life no longer belonged to her. Wrapped in black and escorted through gates that had once opened at her father's command, she was taken to Lord Tryon's estate, the same home where laughter had once greeted her visits, where her uncle had kissed her forehead and promised she would always be safe under his roof. Those promises rotted quickly. The halls were colder here. The servants' eyes slid past her as if she were invisible. Meals were forgotten. Doors were closed. And slowly, painfully, Cassandra learned how easily kindness could be withdrawn when it no longer served a purpose. Lord Tryon's affection vanished like smoke. In its place rose rules, sharp words, and impossible expectations. Cassandra was no longer treated as kin, but as an obligation, an unwanted reminder of the man whose shadow Tryon had finally escaped. And then there was Selina. Her cousin watched everything. Selina's smile was always polite, always perfect, but her eyes told a different story. They lingered too long on Cassandra's dresses, her hair, the way servants still instinctively bowed when Cassandra passed. Envy lived behind that gaze, quiet and poisonous, growing stronger with each passing day, especially the night the moon goddess chose. It happened without warning. Cassandra was alone in the garden, kneeling beneath the moonlight, whispering a prayer for her father's soul. The air changed, thickened, humming with ancient power. The moon brightened until silver flooded the world, and pain seared through her chest. She screamed. Light erupted from her skin, curling like living fire around her arm as the sacred mark burned itself into existence. A crescent moon intertwined with a crown. Old, unmistakable, feared. The mark of a fated mate. The mark of the Alpha King. By the time the household rushed outside, Cassandra had collapsed into the grass, trembling and terrified, the symbol glowing softly against her skin. When the elders confirmed it, the courtyard erupted. Cassandra belonged to Alpha King Rowling, chosen by the moon goddess herself. Hope bloomed in her shattered heart, fragile, dangerous, beautiful. Somewhere beyond these walls lived a king bound to her by fate. Somewhere, a future still waited. But Lord Tryon's face darkened. Selina's smile broke. Because fate, Cassandra would soon learn, was both a blessing and a curse. And on the night she lost her father, destiny claimed her too, setting into motion a chain of betrayal, love, and ruin that would one day shake the kingdom to its core. The kingdom spoke Cassandra's name in hushed tones long before she ever heard his. Alpha King Rowling. He arrived 3 days after the moon goddess marked her. his presence announced by the deep toll of the palace bells and the instinctive bow of every wolf within the walls. Cassandra felt him before she saw him, a pull so powerful it stole the breath from her lungs. It was as if an invisible thread had tightened around her heart and drawn her forward, demanding to be acknowledged. She was 16. He was a king. And destiny had bound them together with merciless precision. Cassandra stood at the edge of the great hall, fingers trembling at her sides as he entered. Rowling was taller than she had imagined, his broad shoulders carrying the quiet authority of a ruler born to command. Silver-gray eyes swept the room, calm, searching, ancient with responsibility, until they found her. The world fell silent. The moment their gazes locked, the bond flared to life, warm, aching, undeniable. Cassandra's knees nearly buckled under the weight of it. Emotion rushed through her in waves she did not yet have words for. Recognition, safety, longing, and something deeper. Something that felt like home. Rowling felt it too. His breath hitched, his hand tightening at his side as the pull of the bond surged through him like lightning. Every instinct in him screamed to cross the distance, to gather her into his arms, to mark her as his before the world. But tradition stood between them. The elders spoke the law aloud that same night, their voices echoing through the hall like a sentence passed by the gods themselves. A fated mate could not be claimed until her 22nd year. Until then, the bond must remain unfulfilled. Until then, restraint was sacred. Rowling bowed his head in acceptance. Cassandra felt her heart fracture. From that day forward, love became a thing they were forced to carry in silence. Rowling visited often, always surrounded by guards, council members, and watching eyes. He never touched her beyond what was permitted, never spoke a word that could be twisted into scandal. Yet in the spaces between propriety, something fragile and powerful grew. A glance held a second too long. A hand brushing hers as he passed her a goblet, sending heat racing through her veins. The way his voice softened when he spoke her name, Cassandra, as though it were a vow rather than a sound. At night, she dreamed of him. Of strong arms she was not allowed to lean into, of a bond begging to be completed. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, and the echo of his presence still wrapped around her like a ghost. Rowling suffered no less. 6 years stretched before him like a lifetime. 6 years of watching his mate live beneath another man's roof. 6 years of resisting the instinct to tear the world apart to reach her. He wrote to her instead. Letters sealed in wax and delivered in secret. Filled with stories of his day, his doubts, and promises whispered onto parchment. "I will wait," he wrote. "I will always wait." Sometimes when the moon was high and the estate slept, Cassandra would sneak into the garden. There, hidden beneath ancient trees, Rowling would be waiting, drawn by the bond, risking everything for a single stolen moment. They never crossed the line, but they came close. Their foreheads would rest together, breaths mingling, hearts racing in perfect, tortured rhythm. Rowling would cup her face as though she were something precious, his thumbs brushing tears from her lashes. "One day," he would murmur, his voice thick with restraint, "you will sit beside me not in secret, but on the throne, and no law will dare keep me from you." Cassandra believed him. She had to, because within Lord Tryon's walls, the cruelty sharpened. Selena's envy festered, and every passing year made Cassandra more aware that her fate inspired not just devotion, but danger. Still, love endured, unclaimed, unfulfilled, unbreakable, bound by time, watched by the gods, and tested by patience. Cassandra and Alpha King Rowling carried a bond the world was determined to deny, unaware that fate, when restrained too long, always demands its price. Fate did not frighten Lord Tryon. Power did. It was why he descended into the eastern woods under cover of night, his cloak drawn tight against the cold as he followed a path no honest man dared tread. The moon hung low and pale above him, its light fractured by twisted branches that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. This was not a place blessed by the moon goddess. This was where bargains were made and paid for. The hut appeared as it always did, half swallowed by shadow, its walls carved with runes older than the kingdom itself. Smoke curled from its crooked chimney, thick with the scent of herbs and something far darker. The witch was waiting. "You took your time," she rasped as he stepped inside, her voice brittle as dried bone. Her eyes, milky yet piercing, lifted to him without surprise. "Men who come here twice never do so by accident." Tryon's jaw tightened. "You owe me counsel," he said coldly. "I would not be standing where I stand without you." A thin smile curled her lips. "And you would not be standing at all without the blood you spilled." The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows across her sunken face as she stirred the pot before her. The scent thickened, bitter and sharp. "You seek the future again," she said. "And this time, it is not your brother's." Tryon did not flinch at the mention of the man whose death still haunted the edges of his ambition. "My daughter must be queen." The witch's hand stilled. Slowly, she turned. "Your niece is the moon goddess's chosen," she said, her voice dropping to something grave. "Her path is sealed. Her bond is sacred. To touch it is to invite ruin." Tryon scoffed. "Destiny bends to those bold enough to seize it." The witch rose, leaning heavily on her staff as she approached him. When she spoke again, the air itself seemed to tremble. "This is not the same game you played before," she warned. "The Alpha King's mate carries more than a crown in her future. She carries blood that will shape the kingdom's fate for generations. Interfere, and the balance will break." She reached out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "If you harm Cassandra, the moon goddess will answer. Not today, not tomorrow. But when she does, everything you have built will burn." For the first time, hesitation flickered in Tryon's eyes. Then Selena's face filled his mind, her tears, her resentment, her hunger for what fate had denied her. Power was never handed freely. It had to be taken. "I did not come here to be frightened by myths," he said, wrenching his hand free. "I came to ensure my bloodline sits on the throne." The witch's gaze hardened. "Then you have learned nothing." Tryon turned away, already sealing his choice with every step toward the door. "Cassandra is young," he said over his shoulder. "Innocent. Mistakes can be arranged, scandals created. Fate can be rewritten if the world believes it so." Behind him, the witch let out a low, sorrowful laugh. "You mistake belief for truth," she said, "and truth always claws its way back." The door slammed shut. Outside, the moon slipped free of the clouds, its silver light following Tryon as he vanished into the trees. A man walking willingly toward his own destruction, already plotting the fall of the girl destiny had sworn to protect. By the time the kingdom began its final preparations, Selena had perfected the art of pretending. She smiled when servants rushed past with bolts of silver silk. She smiled when elders spoke reverently of the moon goddess's blessing. She even smiled when Cassandra passed her in the corridor, glowing with a quiet, fragile happiness that made Selena's nails bite into her palms. Tomorrow, they whispered. Tomorrow, fate would be fulfilled. Cassandra was to be crowned not only Alpha King Rowling's mate, but queen. Selena watched from the shadows as seamstresses fitted Cassandra's ceremonial gown, their hands trembling with awe. Moon thread shimmered through the fabric, catching the light like starlight trapped in silk. The mark on Cassandra's arm glowed faintly beneath the delicate sleeve, alive, aware, as if the moon goddess herself leaned close to admire her chosen daughter. Selena's throat burned. That should be me. She had been raised for this life, trained to bow, to smile, to command a room without raising her voice. She had memorized court etiquette before Cassandra had learned how to braid her hair. Yet destiny had looked past her, as if she were nothing, as if she were invisible. "You look radiant," Selena said sweetly, stepping forward with practiced grace. Cassandra turned, startled, then softened. "Thank you. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the gown. "I'm terrified." Selena tilted her head, studying her cousin's open face. Her honesty, her innocence. It made the envy twist deeper. "You have nothing to fear," Selena replied, placing a reassuring hand over Cassandra's. "You were born for this." The lie tasted bitter and delicious all at once. Later that evening, Selena found her father in his study, pacing before the fire like a caged animal. The glow reflected sharply in his eyes that no longer hid their ambition. "She has everything," Selena said quietly, her voice carefully controlled. "The crown, the king, the future." Tryon stopped. "And you?" he asked. Selena lifted her chin. "I have nothing but a front-row seat to my own humiliation." Silence stretched between them, heavy, dangerous. "She is untested," Tryon said at last. "Young, fragile. The kingdom loves purity almost as much as it loves power." Selena's gaze sharpened. "And purity can be destroyed." Tryon looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, decisively. That night, plans began to take shape. A trusted servant was bribed. A wine supplier was changed. A vial wrapped in velvet was delivered beneath the cover of darkness. Its contents colorless, odorless, devastating. A potion designed not to kill, but to ruin. Selena stood alone on her balcony afterward, staring at the moon as it bathed the palace in silver. Her smile returned, soft, serene, perfectly convincing. "Forgive me," she whispered to the night, though no remorse touched her heart. "Some of us were not born to wait for destiny." Below her, the palace slept, unaware that envy had already sharpened its claws. And as the moon watched silently from above, the final thread holding Cassandra's happiness intact began to fray. The palace had never glowed so brightly. Torches lined the marble halls, their flames dancing in celebration as banners of silver and midnight blue cascaded from the balconies. Music drifted through the air, deep drums and lilting strings woven together in honor of the moon goddess. Nobles arrived adorned in finery, their voices buzzing with excitement, their eyes alight with anticipation. Tomorrow the kingdom would witness destiny fulfilled. Tonight, they would celebrate it. Cassandra stood at the entrance of the grand hall, her breath catching as she took it all in. Candlelight kissed the soft curves of her face, and the ceremonial gown she wore shimmered like liquid moonlight against her skin. She felt fragile and powerful all at once, like something precious balanced on the edge of becoming. And then she felt him. Alpha King Rowling turned at the far end of the hall, as if summoned by instinct alone. When his eyes met hers, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. His gaze softened instantly, all the kingly reserve melting away to reveal the man who had waited 6 years for this night. He crossed the hall without hesitation. "My queen," he murmured when he reached her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. He offered his arm, pride and reverence etched into every line of his face. Cassandra smiled, nervous, radiant, real, and took it. They walked together beneath the watching eyes of the kingdom, their bond visible in the way they leaned toward one another, in the way Rowling's thumb brushed comfortingly against her wrist, in the quiet smiles they shared as if no one else existed. Whispers followed them. "They are perfect." The moon goddess chose well. At last. At the high table, Rowling leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you will be mine. I have waited too long to let the world keep you from me any longer." Cassandra's heart fluttered painfully in her chest. "Tomorrow," she echoed, believing it with everything she was. Across the hall, Lord Tryon watched. His expression was pleasant, approving, the image of a loyal noble honoring his future queen. But beneath the table his fingers tightened around his goblet. At a subtle nod from him, a servant shifted position, one who had been carefully chosen, well paid, and sworn to silence. The servant's hands trembled only once as he poured Cassandra's wine. The vial emptied swiftly, seamlessly, its contents disappearing without a trace. No scent. No color. No warning. The feast began. Laughter rose. Goblets clinked. Dancers spun across the floor, their movements graceful and hypnotic. Cassandra laughed more freely than she had in years, her earlier nerves easing under Rowling's steady presence. She sipped her wine, then another, unaware that each swallow carried her closer to the edge of something terrible. At first, it was only warmth. A strange heat blooming low in her belly, spreading through her veins like wildfire. Her skin felt too tight, her breaths too shallow. She shifted in her seat, confusion flickering through her joy. "Are you well?" Rowling asked softly, concern instantly sharpening his features. I think so," she replied, though her voice wavered. The room seemed brighter, louder. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Across the table, Selena watched silently. Her lips curved into a gentle smile. Lord Tryon lifted his cup in a mock toast, his eyes cold and calculating as he took in Cassandra's flushed cheeks, her unfocused gaze. The potion was working. Destiny, once so close, had been poisoned. And as the moon climbed higher above the palace, bearing witness to love and betrayal alike, the night that was meant to seal a bond instead set the stage for its undoing. By the time Cassandra rose from her seat, the world was tilting. The music that had once sounded joyful now pulsed too loudly in her ears, each note striking like a drumbeat against her skull. Heat rolled through her in relentless waves, unfamiliar and frightening, curling low in her belly and stealing her breath. Her skin felt too tight, her gown suddenly heavy, suffocating. "I need air," she whispered, to no one, to everyone. She stepped away from the high table, forcing a smile past the blur creeping into her vision. No one stopped her. No one noticed the way her steps faltered, or how her fingers scraped the marble wall for balance as she slipped out of the hall and into the cool night. The garden greeted her with silver moonlight and silence. Cassandra stumbled forward, gasping as the cold air hit her lungs. It should have helped. It didn't. The heat only intensified, her senses spiraling wildly out of control. The bond, the sacred bond she had carried patiently for 6 years, suddenly roared awake, no longer a gentle pull, but a demand. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Rowling," she breathed, not realizing she had spoken aloud. Inside the banquet hall, Alpha King Rowling stiffened. The wine he had consumed weighed heavy in his blood, dulling his edges, blurring his thoughts. But the bond cut through the haze with merciless clarity. Pain flared in his chest, sharp and insistent, dragging his attention away from the revelry. Cassandra. Something was wrong. He rose abruptly, ignoring the startled looks of the nobles and the murmured questions of the council. His instincts took over, ancient and absolute, guiding his steps through the corridors, out into the moonlit grounds, and beyond, past the gardens, past the watchtowers, toward the forest line. The pull grew stronger with every step. He found the cabin by instinct alone. It stood abandoned and forgotten, its wooden door hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. Candlelight flickered weakly inside, light Cassandra did not remember lighting. She was there. Curled on the edge of the narrow bed, her hair clinging to her damp cheeks, her breaths shallow and uneven. Her eyes lifted when he entered, unfocused and glassy, relief washing over her face so powerfully it shattered him. "Rowling," she whispered again, reaching for him. The sight nearly brought him to his knees. The bond surged violently between them, raw, unrestrained, fed by her distress and his compromised control. His head swam, instincts roaring past reason, past law, past every vow he had sworn to uphold. He should have turned away. He didn't. He crossed the room in 3 strides, catching her as she swayed. Her skin burned beneath his touch, and the bond screamed approval, drowning out the last fragile threads of restraint. "This isn't right," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction, fractured by need and confusion. I don't understand," Cassandra whispered, clutching his tunic, tears slipping down her flushed cheeks. "Please, don't leave me." That was all it took. Fate, strained, poisoned, manipulated, snapped. The world narrowed to breath and heat and the overwhelming pull that neither of them could resist any longer. Outside, the moon slipped free of the clouds, its silver light spilling through the cabin window as tradition shattered beneath its gaze. By morning, the bond lay altered, no longer untouched, no longer pure. And destiny, once patient, had been forced into motion far too soon. Lord Tryon had not planned on panic. He had planned precision, control. A single, devastating scandal that would shatter Cassandra's purity and place the crown within Selena's reach. The potion had been measured, the timing exact. By dawn, Cassandra was meant to wake disgraced beside a nameless man, her fate sealed by rumor and outrage. But fate, as it often did, twisted. When Tryon arrived at the edge of the forest, with 2 loyal guards and the hired man trailing behind them, the night was unnervingly still. The moon hung full and bright above the abandoned cabin, its light spilling through the warped window like a watchful eye. Tryon felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. "Stay here," he ordered the guards quietly, gesturing toward the tree line. "No noise." He approached the cabin alone. The door creaked open beneath his hand. Candlelight revealed the interior, and the sight within struck him like a blade between the ribs. The Alpha King. Rowling lay beside Cassandra, his arm curved protectively around her even in sleep, his brow furrowed as though some part of him sensed danger still lurking. Cassandra was pale, exhausted, her features slack with the aftermath of a night she would not remember clearly, if at all. For a heartbeat, Tryon could only stare. This was not the plan. If the king was discovered like this, if the truth emerged, then Cassandra would not fall alone. The bond, though broken too soon, would still shield her. The kingdom would bend to protect its Alpha King's mate. Everything Tryon had built would crumble. He recovered quickly. Tryon had not survived court politics by hesitating when blood was on the board. "Get him out," he hissed to the guards as they entered silently. "Now." They moved with grim efficiency, lifting the unconscious king from the bed. Rowling stirred once, murmuring Cassandra's name, but the potion and the wine dragged him back under. Tryon watched as they carried him away, far from the cabin, far from the evidence of what had truly occurred. Then Tryon turned. The hired man stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, breath shallow. "You will do exactly as you were paid to do," Tryon said calmly, too calmly. "Lie beside her. When the guards arrive at dawn, you will say she summoned you, that she has been your lover for months." The man swallowed hard. "But the king—" "The king will remember nothing," Tryon snapped. "And you will remember your reward, or your death. Fear won." The man obeyed. Tryon watched as the final piece was set into place, his expression smooth, composed, almost reverent in its cruelty. He extinguished the candles one by one, plunging the cabin into darkness, then stepped outside as though nothing had happened. By morning, the trap was perfect. At dawn, Cassandra awoke to confusion and pain. Her head throbbed, her body heavy, her memories fractured like broken glass. She turned and screamed. A stranger lay beside her. Guards burst in moments later, drawn by the cry and by orders already set into motion long before the sun rose. They froze at the sight, shock quickly giving way to outrage. Word spread like wildfire. The future queen had been found naked in a cabin with a common man. The hired man wept convincingly, confessing with rehearsed ease. He spoke of secret meetings, of forbidden passion, of a woman who had begged him to come to her despite the coming ceremony. Each lie drove the knife deeper. Cassandra barely heard the accusations. She searched the room wildly, her heart screaming for the one presence that should have been there. "Rowling," she whispered, terror seeping into every syllable. "Where is he?" No one answered. By the time she was dragged back to the palace, the story had already hardened into truth. Nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. Servants looked away in shame. Some looked on with satisfaction. And in the high chambers of the palace, Alpha King Rowling awoke with a pounding head and a hollow ache in his chest. His memories gone, his bond in agony, and his mate already condemned by a crime she did not commit. By sunrise, Cassandra had lost more than her honor. She had lost her voice. And the kingdom had been taught a lie it was all too eager to believe. The council chamber had never felt so cold. Alpha King Rowling stood at its center, shoulders squared, crown heavy upon his head. Yet for the first time since his ascension, he felt utterly powerless. Voices clashed around him, sharp, relentless, demanding, each noble certain of their truth, each one eager to shape the outcome to their advantage. Before him, Cassandra knelt in chains. Her wrists were bound, her gown replaced with a simple gray dress, her hair loose and unadorned. She looked smaller than he remembered, as though the weight of the kingdom's judgment had already begun to crush her. Yet when her eyes lifted to his, they were steady, filled not with guilt, but devastation. Rowling's chest burned. The bond between them was still there, fractured, bruised, but alive. And it screamed at him that something was terribly wrong. "She has shamed the crown," one noble barked. "She has violated sacred law," another cried. "The moon goddess turns her face from impurity." The words battered him from all sides. Rowling pressed his hands against the stone table, fighting the pounding in his head. Memories slipped through his grasp like water through clenched fingers. He remembered the banquet, the wine, the dizziness. Then, nothing. Only fragments. Moonlight. Heat. Cassandra's voice calling his name. And then darkness. They placed the evidence before him like a blade. The hired man stood at the edge of the chamber, head bowed, voice trembling as he repeated his lie. He spoke of secret meetings, of passion, of promises Cassandra had allegedly made him long before the ceremony. Rowling forced himself to listen. Every word felt like betrayal, yet the bond did not break. That was what terrified him most. "Cassandra?" he said finally, his voice hoarse, cutting through the noise. The chamber fell silent. She looked up instantly. "I did not betray you," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "By the moon goddess, I swear it. I don't remember how I got there. I only remember pain, and fear, and calling for you." Her gaze searched his face desperately. "You were there," she whispered. "I know you were." His breath caught. He wanted to believe her. But the nobles surged forward again, relentless as a tide. "There are witnesses. There is confession. The kingdom demands justice." Rowling turned away, raking a hand through his hair. Justice? Or stability? The council pressed harder, their words sharp with political threat. If you protect her, one elder warned quietly, the kingdom will fracture. They will say you are ruled by desire, not law. Another leaned closer. Choose carefully, my king. A weak crown invites rebellion. Rowling felt something inside him crack. He looked at Cassandra one last time, really looked at her, and saw not a traitor, but a girl who had already lost too much. His voice broke when he spoke. Cassandra of House Alaric, he said, forcing the words past the stone lodged in his throat. Until the truth is fully known, you will be confined to the dungeon. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Cassandra's face went white. Imprisonment. Not innocence, not protection, but not death. It was the only mercy he could give her. She bowed her head slowly, as though accepting a wound that cut too deep to scream over. Then the council turned its hunger elsewhere. The kingdom cannot stand without a queen, they declared. The ceremony must proceed. Eyes shifted. To Selena. She stepped forward gracefully, dressed in pale gold, her expression sorrowful, composed, perfect. She knelt before the council, tears shimmering convincingly in her eyes. I never wished for this, she said softly, but if it will bring peace, I will serve. The nobles nodded in approval. Rowling said nothing. When the words were spoken, when Selena was declared queen-elect, something inside him went numb. The bond did not answer. No warmth, no pull, nothing. That absence was louder than any accusation. Later, alone in his chambers, Rowling sank into a chair and pressed his fists against his eyes. He had chosen the crown. And in doing so, he feared he had just condemned the woman he loved. Far below the palace, iron doors slammed shut as Cassandra was thrown into darkness. Her faith shattered, her voice silenced, and her destiny hanging by a thread. Above her, the king sat awake through the night, haunted by a truth he could not remember, and a bond that refused to die. The dungeon smelled of damp stone and despair. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, each echo striking the silence like a slow, merciless countdown. The torches along the corridor burned low, their flames weak and flickering, as though even fire struggled to survive in a place meant to break souls. Cassandra sat alone in the darkness. Her chains were gone, but freedom had not replaced them. The cold had settled into her bones, heavier than iron, and exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Every breath hurt, every thought cut deeper than the last. She had stopped crying hours ago. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. When footsteps echoed down the corridor, she did not look up at first. She assumed it was a guard. Another insult. Another reminder that she was no longer Cassandra of House Alaric, future queen, but a fallen girl awaiting her sentence. Then the air changed. The bond stirred. Her heart clenched painfully as a familiar presence pressed against her senses. Fractured, aching, unmistakable. Rowling. She lifted her head just as he stepped into the torchlight. He looked nothing like the king who had once whispered promises beneath the moon. His shoulders were tense, his face drawn with exhaustion, his silver-gray eyes shadowed by something darker than anger. Regret, pain, loss. Leave us, he ordered the guards quietly. The iron door closed behind him with a sound that felt final. For a long moment they simply stared at one another, two souls bound by fate, separated by lies, standing on opposite sides of a wound too deep to see the bottom of. I shouldn't be here, Rowling said at last, his voice low and strained. But I needed to hear it from you. Cassandra swallowed hard. Her throat burned. Then ask, she whispered. He stepped closer, stopping just beyond arm's reach, as though afraid that touching her might shatter what little control he had left. Tell me the truth, he said. All of it. She closed her eyes. In that instant, Cassandra saw everything clearly. The council's pressure, the fragile balance of the kingdom, the way doubt had already begun to rot the throne from beneath him. She saw the future waiting beyond this dungeon if she spoke her truth. Civil unrest, a divided court, a king accused of weakness, a realm at war over a disgraced mate. And she knew. If she loved him, truly loved him, there was only one thing she could do. When she opened her eyes again, they were calm, resigned. "Yes," she said softly, "I betrayed you." The words fell like a blade. Rowling staggered back as if struck, his breath leaving him in a sharp, broken exhale. The Bond screamed in protest, flaring painfully between them, but he forced himself to ignore it. "Say it again," he demanded hoarsely. "Look at me and say it again." Cassandra lifted her chin, tears blurring her vision even as her voice remained steady. "I broke the law," she said. "I broke my vow to the moon goddess. I betrayed you, and the crown." Each word felt like tearing her own heart apart. "Why?" Rowling whispered. His hands trembled at his sides. "Why would you do this to us?" "Because I love you." But she did not say it. "Because I was weak," she lied. "Because fate frightened me. Because I wanted something that was never mine to take." The Bond howled. Rowling turned away, pressing his palm against the stone wall as if to steady himself. His entire body shook, rage and heartbreak warring violently beneath his skin. "I would have fought for you," he said, his voice cracking. "I would have burned the council to the ground if you had told me the truth." Cassandra's chest tightened painfully. "And the kingdom?" she asked quietly. "What would remain of it afterward?" Silence answered her. She took a slow, shuddering breath. "I won't be the reason your reign is destroyed." He spun back toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. "You don't get to decide that." "I do," she said gently, "because I am already lost." Her voice softened, breaking at last. "You are not." Rowling stared at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a traitor, but as a queen who had chosen sacrifice over survival. The realization devastated him. "I loved you," he whispered. She smiled through her tears. "I still love you." That was the final blow. Rowling stepped back, shaking his head as if trying to deny what his heart screamed. The Bond pulsed painfully, alive, furious, refusing to die, even now. "This ends tonight," he said, forcing his voice to harden. "After this, there is no us." Cassandra nodded. "I know." He turned toward the door. Every step away from her felt like tearing flesh from bone. When his hand closed around the iron handle, he paused, just once, without looking back. "I hope," he said quietly, "that wherever fate takes you, it is kinder than I was." Then he left. The door slammed shut. Cassandra collapsed against the cold stone, her body finally giving in as sobs racked her chest. Silent, broken, unstoppable. Above her, the king walked back into the light of the palace, believing he had buried his mate in that dungeon forever. The kingdom gathered beneath a sky heavy with mourning. Word spread before the bells rang, swift, merciless, unstoppable. The fallen, fated mate of the Alpha King would face judgment at dawn. By the time Cassandra was dragged from the dungeon, the palace courtyard was already filled with nobles, guards, elders, and common wolves alike, all drawn by the promise of justice, or spectacle. Chains weighed down her wrists once more. Her steps were slow, deliberate, not from weakness alone, but from the knowledge that each footfall brought her closer to the end. The cold morning air bit into her skin, yet she did not shiver. Something inside her had gone still, quiet in the way a dying flame stops fighting the wind. She did not look for Rowling. She already knew he would be there. The execution platform loomed ahead, stark and unforgiving. Black banners fluttered overhead, symbols of judgment and disgrace. Cassandra was forced to her knees at its center, her gaze lowered as the council assembled behind her like carrion birds. The High Elder stepped forward. "Cassandra of House Alaric," he intoned, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "You stand accused of defiling sacred law, betraying your fated bond, and shaming the crown. Do you deny these charges?" Silence stretched. Cassandra lifted her head slowly. "I do not," she said. A murmur rippled through the crowd, satisfaction, disappointment, hunger. From the high dais, Alpha King Rowling watched, his face carved from stone. His eyes never left her, yet it was as though an invisible wall stood between them. The bond pulsed faintly, painfully. Like a dying heartbeat, he refused to acknowledge. The elder raised his staff. "Then by ancient law," he declared, "you are sentenced to death." The words landed like a hammer. Some cheered, some gasped, some looked away. Cassandra closed her eyes. She thought of her father, of moonlit gardens, of a love that had once felt eternal. She was ready. Wait. The single word cut through the noise like a blade. Selena stepped forward. She wore white, pure, unblemished, carefully chosen. Her hair was braided with silver thread, her expression soft with sorrow and restraint. Every movement was measured, every breath calculated. "My king," Selena said, lowering herself gracefully before the dais, "and honored council, I beg permission to speak." All eyes turned to her. Rowling stiffened. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. Selena rose slowly, turning toward the crowd. "We stand on sacred ground," she said gently, "before the moon goddess, before a grieving kingdom. Blood will not heal what has been broken here." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Cassandra has sinned," she continued, her gaze flicking briefly toward her cousin. "But she has confessed. She has accepted her guilt. Must we answer disgrace with death?" Whispers stirred. Selena pressed on. "Execution will stain this kingdom with cruelty. It will not restore honor. It will only deepen the wound. Mercy, however, mercy will show strength." The elder frowned. The law also allows banishment," Selena interrupted softly. "Exile to the wastelands. A living death, no name, no protection, no return." A hush fell. Cassandra's breath caught. Banishment. Alive, but erased. Selena turned to the crowd, her eyes glistening. "Let her live," she said, "not as a queen, not as a noble, but as a lesson." The people murmured again, this time with approval. "Mercy," someone whispered. "How kind the new queen is." "She thinks of the kingdom." Rowling's hands curled into fists. He knew what this was. Not mercy. Strategy. Selena met his gaze, her eyes pleading, sincere enough to fool the world. "Please," she said quietly, "let this be the beginning of peace." The council conferred in hushed voices. Then the High Elder lifted his staff once more. "So be it," he declared. "Cassandra of House Alaric, your life is spared. You are hereby banished beyond the borders of the kingdom. You are stripped of title, protection, and name. Should you return, death will be swift and final." The sentence echoed louder than the execution ever could have. The guards seized Cassandra, hauling her to her feet. She did not resist. She did not beg. She only looked up once, just once, toward the dais. Rowling stood frozen. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat the bond flared, raw, anguished, alive. Then Cassandra was turned away. She was marched through the gates before the sun fully rose, pushed beyond the borders into barren land where nothing thrived, and no one returned unchanged. No ceremony. No farewell. By the time the gates slammed shut behind her, Cassandra no longer belonged to the kingdom. She was alive, but she had been erased. And as Selena accepted the praise of the crowd, and the king stood amid cheers that felt like ash in his mouth. Fate watched silently, patiently, knowing that mercy given for selfish gain always exacts its own devastating cost. The wastelands did not welcome survivors. They stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sky, cracked earth, jagged stone, and wind that carried no scent of life. The air was thin, sharp, and unforgiving, slicing through Cassandra's thin cloak as though it sought to peel her down to bone. This was where the kingdom sent its unwanted. This was where hope was meant to die. Cassandra stumbled forward, each step heavier than the last. Her feet bled. Her throat burned. Hunger gnawed at her insides, but worse than the pain was the silence. No birds, no wolves, no moonlit songs, only exile. When she finally collapsed beside a cluster of broken rocks, she did not know how long she lay there. Time blurred into nothingness. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by memories she could not outrun. Her father's smile, Rowling's voice, Selena's false mercy. She woke to the sound of steel sliding from a sheath. Cassandra reached weakly for a stone, rolling onto her side just as a shadow fell across her. A man stood before her. He was older than she expected, his hair streaked with silver, his face carved by hardship and scars. His posture was guarded, wary, as though the world had taught him never to lower his defenses, not even for the broken. "You shouldn't be here," he said gruffly. Cassandra's chest tightened. "I could say the same," she replied hoarsely. His eyes narrowed. "This land kills the unprepared." "Then it seems fitting," she said bitterly. Something flickered in his gaze at that. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "Get up," he said after a moment. "If you stay here, you'll be dead by nightfall." She didn't move. Hatred surged suddenly, sharp and unrestrained, when she finally truly saw him. Jethro. The name burned through her. The man accused of murdering her father. Her hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but fury. "You," she whispered. He stiffened. "Do you know me?" "Yes," she said, pushing herself upright despite the pain. "You're the traitor who sold my father to his death." Silence fell heavy between them. Jethro's expression did not harden. It didn't shift to guilt or fear. Instead, something weary settled into his eyes, something far older than regret. "So," he murmured, "the lies followed me even here." "Lies," Cassandra spat. "My father died because of you." Jethro laughed then, a hollow, broken sound. "No," he said quietly. "Your father died because of your uncle." Her breath caught. "What did you say?" Jethro turned away, staring toward the horizon where the land dipped into endless ruin. "Your father was a good man, too good for the vipers he served beside." He told her everything, how Lord Tryon had come to him years ago, offering gold and protection in exchange for false testimony, evidence meant to condemn Cassandra's father. How Jethro had refused, how Tryon had smiled, and made him the scapegoat instead. "They said I killed him," Jethro said bitterly. "Said I wanted his power, but all I wanted was to keep my honor." Cassandra's knees buckled. The world tilted, reshaping itself with cruel clarity. Every doubt she had ever buried clawed its way free. Tryon's cold composure, his sudden rise, his hatred masked as duty. Her father had not been betrayed by a stranger. He had been murdered by blood. "I watched him die," Jethro continued softly, "and I was powerless to stop it." The silence that followed was deafening. Cassandra sank to the ground, her hands curling into the dirt. The grief she thought she had exhausted surged back with renewed violence, but this time it twisted into something sharper, something colder. Vengeance. When she finally looked up, Jethro was watching her carefully, as though bracing for a blade to the throat. "I still hate you," she said honestly. He nodded. Fair. But, she continued, her voice steadying, you're the only living proof I have of the truth. Jethro exhaled slowly. Then we survived together. From that day on, hatred became tolerance. Tolerance became alliance. Jethro taught her how to survive the wastelands, how to track scarce water, how to read the wind, how to fight when mercy would kill you. Cassandra's body hardened. Her instincts sharpened. The girl who had once knelt in silk learned to stand in blood and dust. At night, beneath a sky stripped bare of mercy, Cassandra stared at the moon, not with prayers, but with promises. You chose me, she thought, and I will not waste it. Grief no longer owned her. It had been replaced. And somewhere deep within the wastelands, a fallen, fated mate was becoming something far more dangerous than a victim. She was becoming inevitable. The wastelands did not soften with familiarity. If anything, they grew crueler, as though testing whether Cassandra truly intended to survive them. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, marked only by the rising and falling of a sun that offered no mercy. The soft-handed girl who had once lived behind palace walls was burned away piece by piece, replaced by someone sharper, leaner, harder to break. Jethro wasted no time. If you hesitate, he told her on the first morning, pressing a blade into her trembling hand, you die. There was no ceremony to her training, no praise, no patience. Jethro pushed her relentlessly, through exhaustion, through hunger, through pain that left her muscles screaming and her lungs raw. He taught her how to strike without warning, how to block without fear, how to rise after the ground had stolen her breath. She fell often. At first, bloodied knees, split lips, bruises that bloomed purple and black beneath her skin. Each failure burned, but Cassandra never begged him to stop. She welcomed the pain. Pain was simple. Pain obeyed rules. Pain did not betray you. Again, Jethro barked as she struggled to her feet one afternoon, sweat blinding her eyes. Her arms shook as she raised the blade. Again. Each swing stripped away another layer of grief. Each bruise silenced another echo of the girl she had been, the girl who had trusted, who had loved, who had knelt and begged for mercy. At night, when her body ached too deeply for sleep, Cassandra stared into the fire and let her thoughts sharpen like steel. She no longer cried for Rowling. She no longer dreamed of crowns. She dreamed of truth. She trained until her hands blistered, then trained harder. Her body grew stronger, her movements surer, her fear replaced by instinct. Where once she had flinched at raised voices, now she met Jethro's gaze without hesitation. You're learning, he said one evening, watching her clean her blade. Not just how to fight. How to endure, she replied. He nodded. How to become dangerous. The words settled deep. Weeks later, Cassandra began to notice the changes. At first, she blamed exhaustion, the constant nausea, the way certain smells turned her stomach. She pushed through it, refusing weakness, refusing to slow. But her strength began to falter. Her vision blurred during training. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. One morning, as the sun climbed pale and unforgiving into the sky, Cassandra raised her blade, and the world went black. She hit the ground hard. Jethro was at her side instantly, gripping her shoulders, his voice sharp with alarm. Cassandra, wake up! Her lashes fluttered. She tried to sit up, but dizziness slammed into her again, fierce and unrelenting. I'm fine, she insisted weakly. You're lying, Jethro snapped. He helped her to the shelter of their camp, forcing water between her lips, studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy. You haven't been eating enough, she offered. No, he said slowly. This is different. Days passed and the weakness did not fade. Instead, understanding dawned. Slow, terrifying, undeniable. Cassandra sat by the fire one night, her hands resting unconsciously over her stomach, her thoughts racing. Heat, sickness, collapse. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. The word was a prayer, a denial, a plea. Jethro noticed her stillness. "What is it?" She looked up at him, eyes wide, not with fear, but shock so profound it hollowed her chest. "I think—" Her voice broke. She swallowed hard. "I think I'm pregnant." The fire crackled loudly between them. Jethro froze. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind swept across the wastelands, carrying dust and destiny alike. "Impossible," he said at last. Cassandra laughed weakly. "That's what I thought." But they both knew the truth. The night tradition had been broken. The bond had not been silent. Fate had not been finished. Jethro slowly sank to his knees before her, his face pale, his voice barely audible. "The child would be his," Cassandra finished. "The Alpha King's heir." Silence swallowed them whole. Fear stirred, but it did not take root. Instead, something far more dangerous rose within Cassandra's chest. Resolve. "They wanted me erased," she said softly, her hand pressing protectively against her stomach. "They wanted my name forgotten." She lifted her chin, eyes burning with a quiet, unyielding fire. But fate doesn't die so easily. Jethro bowed his head, not in submission, but in recognition. "You carry more than life now," he said. "You carry the future." Cassandra stared into the flames, feeling the steady, fragile promise growing within her. She was no longer just surviving. She was protecting. And the wastelands, which had forged her in ash and pain, would soon bear witness to something the kingdom had never anticipated. A mother, a reckoning, and a destiny that refused to be buried. The moon rose wrong that night. Cassandra felt it long before she saw it, an unease stirring deep in her bones, a low, aching pull that spread through her body like a warning whispered by the earth itself. The air grew heavy, charged, pressing against her lungs until every breath felt deliberate. Then the pain came. Sharp, sudden, unforgiving. She cried out, clutching her stomach as the first contraction tore through her, stealing her breath and dropping her to her knees in the dust. The wastelands answered with silence, vast and merciless, as though the world itself had drawn back to watch. Jethro was at her side, in an instant. "It's time," he said, voice tight, eyes lifting to the sky. The moon had turned crimson, not the gentle silver of the moon goddess's blessing, but blood red, massive and blazing, bathing the wastelands in an otherworldly glow. Ancient instinct screamed through Jethro's veins. He had seen many moons in exile, but never this. A blood moon. A moon of endings and beginnings. They moved quickly, urgency stripping away fear. Jethro guided Cassandra to the shelter of their cave, laying furs beneath her as another contraction ripped through her, stronger this time, relentless. Sweat soaked her hair, her hands trembling as she fought to stay grounded. "I can't," she gasped. "It hurts." Jethro knelt beside her, steady, unyielding. "You can," he said firmly. "You must." The pain came in waves, each one fiercer than the last. Cassandra screamed, the sound raw and unrestrained, torn from a place deeper than fear, deeper even than grief. She clutched at the earth, at Jethro's arm, at anything that anchored her to the present as her body was pushed to its limits. Above them, the blood moon burned brighter. The wind howled through the wastelands, swirling dust and ash into the air, as though the land itself had sensed what was being born. Cassandra felt something awaken within her, an ancient strength, primal and commanding, surging alongside the pain. This was not just birth. This was destiny, forcing its way into the world. "Push!" Jethro urged, his voice fierce with awe now. "Cassandra, Push! She cried out again, body arching as she gave everything she had left. The bond flared violently within her, blazing hot and undeniable, echoing across distance and blood and fate itself. And then, a cry split the night. Strong, powerful, alive. The sound echoed across the wastelands, carried on the wind beneath the blood moon's gaze. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Jethro froze. In his hands lay a child, slick with blood and moonlight, screaming with a strength no newborn should possess. Crimson light pulsed from the infant's skin, bathing the cave in a glow so intense Jethro had to shield his eyes. Symbols burned briefly along the child's shoulder. Ancient. Royal. Alpha. Cassandra sobbed as Jethro laid the baby against her chest. The moment their skin touched, the crimson light flared once more, then settled, sinking into the child as though it had always belonged there. The baby opened his eyes. They glowed red. Not with malice, but with power. Jethro fell to his knees. His breath left him in a single, broken exhale, as instinct overwhelmed reason. He bowed his head, pressing his fist to the earth. "Moon goddess preserve us," he whispered. "An Alpha has been born." Cassandra stared down at her son, trembling, tears streaming freely now. Not from pain, but from awe so profound it shattered her. She felt it unmistakably, a bond unlike any she had ever known, fierce and absolute. "My son," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you survived." The blood moon began to fade, its crimson glow slowly retreating, as though its purpose had been fulfilled. The wind softened. The wastelands exhaled. Far away, beyond stone walls and lies, Alpha King Rowling gasped awake, clutching his chest as the bond ignited with blinding force. Pain and love and recognition slammed into him all at once, memories roaring back like a flood breaking through a dam. And Heir lived. Back in the cave, Cassandra held her child close, her spine straightening despite her exhaustion. Something had shifted irrevocably within her. She was no longer just a fallen, fated mate. She was a mother to an Alpha Prince. And the world, whether it wished to or not, would one day bow. Rowling woke with a cry torn from his chest. Pain, sharp, blinding, absolute, ripped through him as he bolted upright in bed, fingers clutching at his heart as though something inside it had been violently awakened. The room spun. The silk sheets were soaked with sweat. His breath came in ragged pulls, each one burning. The bond was on fire. Not the dull, aching wound it had been for months, but a living, roaring force, blazing through his blood with undeniable purpose. An Alpha. The certainty struck him with such ferocity that he nearly fell from the bed. "No," he whispered, shaking his head as if denial could silence instinct. "That's impossible." Across the chamber, Selena stirred, lifting herself onto one elbow. "Rowling?" she murmured sleepily. "What is it?" He did not look at her, because the bond, his bond, had reached outward, far beyond the palace walls, far beyond the borders of the kingdom, and it had answered something. Someone. Not Selena. Never Selena. The realization hollowed him out. His hands trembled as fragments began to surface, images crashing into his mind without mercy. Moonlight through warped wood, the scent of pine and dust, heat coiling low in his body that had not been born of wine alone. A cabin. Rowling staggered to his feet. "Where are you going?" Selena asked, suddenly alert. "I need air," he said harshly, already pulling on his cloak. The words tasted like ash. "Do not follow me." He left before she could speak again. The corridors blurred as he moved through them, guided not by thought, but by instinct. Guards bowed, servants stepped aside. No one dared stop him, not with that expression carved into his face. The bond pulled. hard, relentless. The forest greeted him with cold night air and silvered shadows. He did not summon a horse. He ran, faster than any man should, faster than thought, until the trees thinned and the abandoned cabin came into view. It stood exactly as it had in his dreams, exactly as it had in his nightmares. Rowling slowed, dread creeping up his spine. His hand hovered over the door before he pushed it open. The scent hit him first. Cassandra. Not a memory, not an echo. Her. The world shattered. Memories surged back with brutal clarity, no longer fragmented, no longer blurred by potion or denial. He remembered her collapsing, her skin burning beneath his hands, her voice, soft, frightened, calling his name. He remembered the bond screaming, remembered choosing her, remembered loving her. No, he breathed, staggering backward as the truth crashed down on him. Moon goddess. No. He had been there. He had been with her. The hired man's confession replayed in his mind, and for the first time it rang false. The council's certainty cracked. The evidence twisted into something grotesque and staged. And then the final piece locked into place. The surge he had felt. The alpha presence igniting his bond. The overwhelming, primal recognition. A child had been born. His child. Rowling fell to his knees in the dirt outside the cabin, a broken sound tearing from his throat as guilt and horror consumed him. They lied, he whispered hoarsely. They all lied. Cassandra had not betrayed him. She had protected him. The dungeon. Her confession. Her calm acceptance of blame. It all made sense now, slicing deeper than any blade. She had sacrificed herself to save his crown, and he had let her. He pressed his fist into the earth, breath shuddering. I failed you, he whispered to the night. I failed our child. The bond answered, fierce, alive, unbroken. Somewhere beyond the wastelands, a heartbeat pulsed in perfect, undeniable rhythm with his own. An heir lived, a queen lived. And the truth, long buried beneath lies and cowardice, had finally risen. Rowling rose slowly, his expression no longer shattered, but forged into something dangerous. Resolve. Find her, he ordered the wind, the forest, the gods themselves. Bring them home. Because mercy had already cost him everything. And this time, the king would not hesitate. The palace woke to orders spoken like thunder. By sunrise, Alpha King Rowling had shed every trace of hesitation. Gone was the ruler who bowed beneath council pressure and political caution. In his place stood an Alpha awakened, his instincts sharpened by truth, his bond burning with purpose. Summon the guard of the Silver Fang, he commanded, his voice carrying through the throne room. All of them. The captain stiffened. My king, to where? Rowling's eyes lifted, silver gray darkened by fury and resolve. To the wastelands! My mate lives. My heir lives. And anyone who stands between me and them will be treated as an enemy of the crown. The words sent a tremor through the chamber. This was no search. This was a hunt. Within the hour, riders thundered through the gates, cloaked in black and silver, carrying the king's personal sigil, an unmistakable declaration of royal intent. Orders were sealed in blood and wax, their purpose clear. Find Cassandra. Protect the Alpha Prince. Return them alive, but destiny, once again, was already moving. From the shadows of the palace, Lord Tryon watched the riders depart. His fingers curled slowly around the arms of his chair, knuckles whitening, as dread finally pierced the armor of his ambition. The Alpha King knew. How? Selena demanded, her composure cracking for the first time. You said the bond was broken. You said he would never know. I said nothing of the moon goddess's patience, Tryon snapped. Fear sharpened Selena's voice. If he finds her, if he finds the child, then everything we built burns. Tryon finished coldly. Silence stretched between them, heavy with inevitability. Tryon straightened. "Summon the rogues." Selena's breath caught. "Father." "They owe me," he said. "And they move faster than royal guards. If the child dies, the bond dies with it." Selena swallowed hard, then nodded. By nightfall, shadows slipped beyond the kingdom's borders. Wolves without banners, without honor, bound only by coin and cruelty. Their eyes gleamed feral in the dark, nostrils flaring as instinct caught the faintest trace of something powerful. The attack came at dawn, not with horns or howls, but with silence so complete it made the air feel brittle. Cassandra felt it snap through her like a blade to the spine. Her son stirred against her chest, a low, uneasy sound vibrating from his tiny throat, instinct recognizing danger long before reason could name it. Jethro was already on his feet. "They've found us," he said quietly. Outside the cabin, the wastelands held their breath. Then the shadows moved. The first rogue wolf burst from the rocks with a snarl, followed by another, and another, dark shape slipping through dust and stone with lethal precision. Their eyes glowed with hunger, their movements stripped of honor or hesitation. "Rogues. They're not here for you," Jethro said grimly, drawing his blade. "They're here for the child." Cassandra's arms tightened instinctively around her son. Fear flared hot and sharp, but it did not root her in place. Not anymore. "Then they'll have to go through us," she said. The first wolf lunged. Jethro met him head-on. Steel rang against claw as the impact echoed across the wastelands. Jethro moved with brutal efficiency, years of survival etched into every strike. He drove the rogue back, then pivoted, cutting down another before it could reach Cassandra. "Run when I say!" he barked. "No," Cassandra replied, drawing the blade he had taught her to wield. "We fight together." For a heartbeat, pride flickered across Jethro's scarred face. Then the battle consumed them. Cassandra moved on instinct, no longer the girl who had once trembled beneath judgment, but a woman forged in exile and fire. She struck fast and low, protecting her son with her body even as she fought, her movements sharp despite the ache still lingering from childbirth. A rogue lunged for her. She blocked, twisted, and drove her blade into its side, the impact jolting her to the bone. Blood sprayed hot against her skin. The child cried, angry, furious, alive. The sound seemed to enrage the rogues further. "Too many!" Jethro growled, cutting down another but staggering as claws tore across his side. "Jethro!" Cassandra shouted. He gritted his teeth. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "When I say go, you go." Another rogue leapt. Jethro stepped in front of Cassandra without hesitation. Claws pierced flesh. The sound, wet, final, echoed louder than any scream. Jethro gasped, staggering as blood bloomed across his chest. Still, he did not fall. He roared instead, driving his blade upward and ripping the rogue down with him. He dropped to one knee. Cassandra felt the moment something irrevocable broke. "No," she whispered. Jethro looked back at her, his eyes already dimming, but fierce. "This was always my end," he said hoarsely. "I was never meant to walk out of the wastelands." Another howl rose in the distance. More coming. "Go!" he commanded. "Now!" Cassandra shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "I won't leave you." "You already lost one father," Jethro said softly. "Don't let your son lose his future." He pushed himself upright with a growl of pain, blood soaking the earth beneath him. He turned to face the oncoming rogues, standing alone between them and everything that mattered. "I bought you time," he said. "Use it." The Alpha Prince cried again, loud, furious, commanding. Cassandra felt something answer inside her. Steel, fire, resolve. She pressed her forehead briefly to Jethro's. You were innocent, she whispered. I swear your name will be cleared. A faint smile touched his lips. Then it was worth it. He turned away. Cassandra ran. She did not look back as she fled into the wastelands, her child held tight against her heart. Behind her, steel rang, wolves howled, and a man who had already lost everything gave the last of himself without hesitation. Jethro fell standing. By the time the rogues realized their prize was gone, the land was already swallowing Cassandra and her son whole, dust and stone closing behind them like a promise. Cassandra could run no farther. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled beneath her. Dust clung to her skin and hair, and blood, Jethro's blood, had dried dark against her sleeve. Yet she did not stop until the strength simply left her body. When she finally fell to her knees, the wastelands were silent once more. Her son whimpered softly, a small, furious sound against her chest, his tiny fingers clutching her tunic, as if he already understood that the world would never be gentle with him. Cassandra bowed her head over him, breath shaking, not in weakness, but in the aftermath of survival. Then she felt it. A presence. Steel-sharp, disciplined, familiar in a way that made her heart lurch painfully. She looked up just as figures crested the ridge ahead, wolves in human form, cloaked in black and silver, moving with the unmistakable authority of the crown. They stopped the moment they saw her. One stepped forward. "Lower your weapons," he commanded quietly. The guards froze, because they felt it too. The Alpha Prince stirred, eyes opening as a pulse of power rolled outward, controlled, undeniable, ancient. The guards dropped to one knee as one, fists striking the earth in reverence. "My queen," the captain said hoarsely, "we have found you." Cassandra's breath caught. She did not correct him. The journey back to the palace felt unreal, like walking out of a nightmare and into a memory she no longer trusted. Cassandra rode wrapped in silence, her child held close, the guards forming an unbreakable shield around them. No one questioned her. No one doubted. The bond led them home. The palace erupted when she arrived. Cries rang out. Whispers turned to shouts. Nobles flooded the corridors, disbelief painted across their faces as Cassandra stepped through the gates, not broken, not begging, but standing tall, her spine straight, her gaze unyielding, and in her arms, the child. Alpha King Rowling was already there. He did not speak when he saw her. He simply crossed the distance between them and dropped to his knees. The sight stunned the court into silence. "My mate," he whispered, voice breaking as he pressed his forehead to the stone. "My queen. Forgive me." Cassandra looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned toward the council. "Summon them all," she said calmly. "Every lord, every elder, every liar." They gathered in the great hall beneath a tense, watchful silence. Cassandra stood at the center, her son awake now, eyes glowing faintly as though the truth itself lent him strength. She told them everything: the potion, the cabin, the planted man, the false confession, the dungeon, the exile, the wastelands. Jethro. At his name, something shifted. Guards stiffened, elders exchanged glances, the weight of buried guilt pressing in. And this child, Cassandra finished, lifting her son slightly, was born beneath a blood moon, marked by the moon goddess herself. The child's mark flared briefly, crimson and unmistakable. The chamber erupted. Tryon shouted first. "This is madness!" he roared, stepping forward. "She is a traitor, a liar, she—" "Enough!" Rowling's voice cracked through the hall like thunder. Guards seized Tryon instantly. The king turned to him slowly, eyes cold, silver blazing. "You poisoned my mate. You framed her. You murdered your own brother and condemned an innocent man to die in exile." Tryon struggled, fury and terror warring on his face. I did it for the kingdom." "You did it for yourself," Cassandra said quietly. Rowling drew his blade. The council did not object. Tryon died where he stood, his ambition ending in the blood he had spilled so freely. Silence followed. Then all eyes turned to Selena. She stood frozen, color draining from her face as guards approached. "I only wanted peace," she whispered, tears spilling now. Real, too late, useless. "You wanted a crown," Cassandra replied. Selena was stripped of her finery, her jewels torn away, her title erased with a single decree. "Banishment," Rowling declared coldly. "Forever." As Selena was dragged from the hall, she looked back once, at Cassandra, at the child, at the truth she had tried to bury. Regret flickered briefly in her eyes. Then she was gone. The council knelt. The guards knelt. The kingdom knelt. Cassandra stood before them all, not as the girl who had once begged to be believed, but as a mother, a survivor, and a queen forged by betrayal and fire. Rowling rose beside her and gently took her hand. "By blood," he said, lifting their son, "and by bond, the Alpha Prince has returned." The hall erupted, not in condemnation, but in reverence. Fate had come full circle, and this time, the true queen had come home. The kingdom waited, not with fear, not with doubt, but with reverence. The great ceremonial grounds lay bathed in silver light, the stones freshly washed, the banners lifted high beneath a sky so clear it felt deliberate, as though the moon goddess herself had brushed away every lingering shadow. Wolves filled the terraces and courtyards, standing shoulder to shoulder in a silence heavy with meaning. This was not a coronation born of politics. This was destiny correcting itself. Cassandra stood at the center of the sacred circle, her son cradled safely in the arms of the high priestess. She wore no crown yet, no jewels, no borrowed symbols of power. Only white, simple, unadorned, because nothing false was permitted before the moon. Rowling approached her slowly, not as Alpha King, but as a mate who had failed and returned. He stopped before her, removing his crown and placing it upon the stone at her feet. The gesture rippled through the crowd, shock and awe stirring as one. Kings did not kneel. Rowling did. "I am not here to command," he said, his voice carrying across the grounds without effort. "I am here to atone." He lifted his gaze to Cassandra, and for the first time since fate had bound them, there was no throne behind his eyes. Only a man stripped bare by truth. "I doubted you," he said quietly. "When the bond screamed, I silenced it. When you stood alone, I chose order over love. I let fear dress itself as duty, and in doing so, I broke you." His voice fractured. "I lost you. I lost our child, and the moon goddess still did not turn from me, because you carried the cost I should have borne." A hush fell so deep, the wind seemed to pause. "I do not beg forgiveness as king," Rowling continued, bowing his head. "I ask it as your mate, as the man who will spend every breath proving he is worthy of the mercy you were never obligated to give." Cassandra stepped forward. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. She looked at him, not with pain, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who had walked through fire and emerged whole. "I loved you when I was powerless," she said. "I loved you when it cost me everything. And I survived, not because you saved me, but because I chose myself." She lifted his chin gently. "I forgive you," Cassandra said. "Not because I am weak enough to forget, but because I am strong enough to remember without breaking." The moon answered. Light poured down from the heavens, silver and warm, wrapping them both in its glow. The sacred mark on Cassandra's arm ignited, not burning, but alive, responding to its counterpart in Rowling's chest. The bond surged, whole, unbroken, unchallenged. Rowling rose and drew her close, his voice low, reverent. "By the moon goddess's will, I claim you, now and forever." He marked her, not in secrecy, not in shame, but before the entire kingdom. The mark sealed with a pulse of power that rolled outward, gentle yet absolute, settling into the land itself. Wolves bowed instinctively. Some wept. Others pressed fists to their hearts in awe. The high priestess stepped forward, lifting the crown. "By blood proven," she intoned, "by bond fulfilled, and by fate returned to its rightful course, I crown you queen." The crown touched Cassandra's head, and the moon blazed brighter. Her sun stirred, releasing a soft, commanding sound that echoed with promise. The Alpha Prince, born of betrayal and prophecy, opened his eyes, and the light reflected back from them like a vow renewed. Rowling took Cassandra's hand. No chains bound them now. No law stood between them. No lie remained unburied. Above them, the moon goddess watched in silence, her promise kept at last. Love, once shattered by fear and ambition, stood restored not by chance, but by truth, sacrifice, and a woman who refused to be erased. Fate had been delayed, but it had never been denied. The end